Hello and welcome to Take Two, the show that looks at the issues behind the news. I'm Ian Henshall. Swine flu vaccine scandal. The great swine flu hoax. A lot of people suspected it at the time, but to others it seemed unbelievable. The media and the planet's leading health authorities all plugging an epidemic which did not exist and an expensive cure that did not work. But now it's pretty widely agreed. As the UK's Daily Telegraph put it, Tamiflu, drugs given for swine flu, were a waste of £500 million. And that's based on an Oxford University study which found that the expensive drug Tamiflu did nothing to halt the alleged 2009 swine flu epidemic. And even for people who had flu, it was quite likely to make their symptoms worse. As is often the case, the officially promoted conspiracy theories are the most dangerous. The theory we were all threatened by a deadly flu epidemic in 2009 was promoted by the medical authorities, including the US Centre for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, while the expensive drug Tamiflu was promoted as the answer. But the Oxford study found that Tamiflu has been linked to suicides of children in Japan and suggested that far from easing flu symptoms, it could actually worsen them. Even where the media have reported, they seem to be ignorant of other research which shows that there probably was not a swine flu pandemic in the first place. Responsible for monitoring the pandemic in the US was the Centre for Disease Control. But one of the US's leading investigative reporters, Cheryl Atkinson, found out by using Freedom of Information requests that, contrary to its public statements at the time, the CDC knew that there was no swine flu pandemic. Once again, we have the media promoting myths and then covering up their false information with threats to reporters and self-censorship. CBS News refused to screen Atkinson's story and she eventually resigned. In a recent interview, she said that the CDC, ignoring their federal mandate, stopped counting swine flu cases in the summer of 2009. She explained to blogger John Rees, the implications of the story were even worse than that. We discovered that before the CDC mysteriously stopped counting swine flu cases, they had learned that almost none of the cases they had counted as swine flu was in fact swine flu or any sort of flu at all. We'd aired numerous stories on CBC pumping up the idea of an epidemic, but not the one that would shed original new light on all the hype. Do surveillance agencies blackmail politicians? Regular watchers of Take Two will recall that, unlike the mainstream media, we have drawn attention to what could be the most damaging aspect of the total surveillance state that has been revealed in recent months operating in the UK and the US. This is the ability of whoever controls the secret police apparatus to use surveillance information to blackmail politicians and others who are supposed to be in charge. Bizarrely, The Guardian newspaper recently brought out a special supplement congratulating themselves on their exposures of surveillance and secret police infiltrators, but failing to make any mention of this obvious risk, which would explain the irrational behaviour of politicians like Tony Blair and Barack Obama. It emerged in the Jimmy Savile scandal that reports of Savile's child abuse were scooped out of police files and passed on to a department dealing in high-profile accusations, probably part of MI5. Now something similar has emerged in the Cyril Smith child abuse scandal. The Daily Mail calls it a monstrous cover-up. How the Liberal Party, police and MI5 concealed MP Cyril Smith's industrial-scale child abuse. Child porn was found in Smith's car, but police were ordered to release him. Police received at least 144 complaints from victims, yet authorities blocked any prosecution, says the Mail. MI5 and special branch officers put pressure on police to drop investigations. One brave whistleblower in the US has provided another piece of the jigsaw. Russell Tice used to work for the NSA. He is an eyewitness to what went on, but still most of the mainstream US media find his most significant allegations too hot to report. Tice recently told the Boiling Frogs blog spot that the NSA had ordered wiretaps on phones connected to then Senate candidate Barack Obama in 2004. Tice said, quotes, "One of the papers that I held in my hand was to wiretap a bunch of numbers associated with a 40-something-year-old wannabe senator for Illinois. That's who they went after, and that's now the President of the United States," close quotes. Host Sybil Edmonds, herself a whistleblower, and Tice both raised concerns that such alleged monitoring of subjects, unbeknownst to them, could provide the intelligence agencies with huge power to blackmail their targets. Tice maintains that the mass NSA surveillance is probably being used to gather records for millions of Americans, contrary to what they're claiming even now to the American public. The NSA denies Tice's allegations. Tice believes the NSA has developed the capacity to collect all digital communications, word for word, period. And that's a quote. Intel stops conflict minerals. Well, here's our bit of good news. It's from the alternative newspaper Positive News. In case you don't know, Positive News is part of a movement that believes that thinking positively and supporting solutions rather than dwelling on problems is the best way to get things working better. In their current issue, Positive News reports that US giant Intel announced in January this year that they would no longer use conflict minerals in their microprocessors. Meanwhile, moves in the US Congress could lead to new rules requiring firms to disclose where they do get their raw materials. Currently, bloody wars in Africa, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, are funded by warlords seizing mining facilities and selling valuable metals and minerals to multinational companies. However, it's going to be a long, bumpy road. While claiming to be on the good side, Intel is still supporting a US lawsuit which seeks to strike down an existing law, claiming they have a constitutional right to keep their suppliers secret. Meanwhile, Apple too are getting in on the act, announcing in January that they are auditing all their suppliers of the ingredient tantalum. However, they are still unsure of about 100 suppliers, so that has quite a long way to go too. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome today John Rees, who's the National Officer of Stop the War, which is the UK's leading anti-war coordinating body, if you like. John, we meet at a time, as ever, of war. Seems to get almost more wars rather than less, and despite Barack Obama's implied promises to reduce the wars. So we've got Ukraine possibly turning into a war, we've got Syria in full flow. I mean, how do you maintain your optimism as a campaigner?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened in the recent past, which is cause for optimism among anybody who wants to see an end to war, is the vote that happened last year in the British House of Commons over a strike on Syria. Now, they were very, very seriously preparing for this. The armaments and the ships were in place in order to carry out what we now know would have been a very sustained strike on the Syrian regime.
We do know that, do we?
Yes, we do. I mean, papers that have come out in the United States prove that they actually had a larger bombing campaign rather than a shorter bombing campaign.
Despite Kerry's very explicit statement that it was only going to be a short campaign.
Yes, but you know, there's never been a war that started where they said, "Okay, guys, we're in for the long haul here." It's always going to be a short campaign, including famously the First World War. But no, it was going to be a very serious strike, and the British Prime Minister went to the House of Commons, and for the first time since 1782, when a British Prime Minister asked for a vote for war, he didn't get it. And I think that was because of cumulative anti-war campaigning over more than a decade now. I think that brought home to the MPs the fact that majority public opinion in this country over the Afghan war, the Iraq war, even the strike on Libya were deeply unpopular. And if they went down this road one more time, there would be a very, very serious price to pay politically. And so I think, first of all, Labour MPs, but then even some Tory MPs decided, no, we're not going to do this. I think this had a much bigger effect than they thought. It forced Obama to look again at the question, and ultimately the strike was called off.
Now, just to change the subject, let's take a look over at America. Ralph Nader, you know, the very long-standing activist, he's just brought out a book called Unstoppable, and he sees the way future as being an alliance between elements of the left and elements of the right. I suppose he's thinking about the libertarian right, who don't like wars, or a lot of them don't, in America, and the anti-war left. I mean, do you see much future in that sort of alliance?
Not really. I think what's missing out of American politics isn't another group of people who want to ally with the right. What's missing in American politics is a strong and organised left, starting from the trade union. Trade union membership is down around 12% in the US. That's why wages for American workers have fallen even more dramatically and for longer than they have in this country. There's no Labour Party. Now, whatever we think about the Labour Party, at least it identifies itself as with the working class. At least there's a debate about should the Labour Party or shouldn't it be socialist. There's no debate about whether the Democrats should be socialist. Nobody even imagines that that's possible. So in the broadest possible terms, in the broadest possible Labour movement terms, what's missing is a left, including a far left in the United States. And I think that was one of the things that weakened the anti-war movement there. Anti-war opinion isn't different in the United States than in
the general public opinion
in this country.
Totally.
What's missing is an organised and collective movement that can focus it on the political establishment, and I think that all those things are connected. If you have a weak union movement, if you don't have a Labour Party, if you don't have a kind of environment in which left ideas can be sensibly discussed, then every movement is weaker because of it.
Yeah, but in a sense, in the UK, over this vote on the Syria strike, it was in a sense the Tory rebels who sort of swung the vote.
Oh, I think if the left hits the political establishment hard enough, even sections of the establishment begin to think, whoa, hang on, is this really a good idea? We're getting into more trouble here than we thought. But there are two different things going on here. The left wants to take on the establishment. The people who sometimes ally with the left because they think they're in trouble want to protect the establishment from any more trouble. And that's and putting those two things together in an ongoing organisational relationship, if that's what Ralph Nader's suggesting, I think really wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think he's seeing more as sort of ad hoc coalitions, and he cites they nearly got a vote to stop the NSA surveillance. There was 11 votes short of a victory in the House of Representatives, and that's the sort of thing he's citing.
Yeah, well, I think if the left is strong enough, it can, as I say, it can kind of break away sections of the establishment who think the whole thing's gone too far.
Yeah.
We're losing our base of public support here. Now, if that happens, fine.
Yeah.
But if you start predicating your strategy on being able to do that, you almost inevitably begin to make compromise with the right, which actually disable you in hitting the establishment hard enough to achieve the aim that you really want to get.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So thinking about the left here in the UK now, I know that the Labour Party is far from ideal. So my next question would be, well, Tony Blair, I mean, he's got to go down in history as, let's say, the most right-wing Labour leader. I think everybody agrees that in history. Do you see any prospect, and still a lot of people in the Labour Party regard him as a good thing? I mean, perhaps you're better in touch than we are. How do you see this playing out in the Labour Party? I mean, is there any chance he could be brought to justice? Not by the Labour Party. I certainly think that's true, and possibly not at all. It would be an enormous departure from everything that we've seen before if a kind of first world industrialized nations leader were brought in front of the War Crimes Tribunal. This is something that really is only reserved for smaller and weaker nations, usually in Africa or the Third World, who don't have the kind of panoply of forces to protect them that most industrialized leaders in the industrialized world do. So I don't think that we should let up on that campaign, and you never know what the alignment of forces might be at some point which allowed that to happen. But I think if you're banking your next year's you wouldn't bet the bank on it, bet the farm on it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be continuing with this interview in our next show, and for now, thanks very much, John.
Thank you.
To Mariane Leroc, who's an investigative journalist in her own right, but she was also a friend of Mike Rupert, who tragically died, one of the leading US dissident media figures, who tragically died in an apparent suicide a few weeks ago. Marianne, you knew Mike. He was on a SCADS conference. He seemed very gloomy. Was it suicide or was it murder?
Definitely suicide, no doubt about it. He went to great pains to make sure that nobody would be blamed for it, to the extent that he put notes on the doors to say he didn't want anybody to go inside until the sheriff had been called, so that the crime scene would, as an ex-detective, he didn't want the crime scene to have anything where it'd have anybody else's DNA or anything they could point the finger at anybody for.
Right.
And he left several suicide notes.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and that's what all his associates are saying.
They're published online as well now.
So it could be, I mean, you know, in a sense he was murdered just by harassment, you know, a guy who was a little bit volatile mentally, maybe 10, 20 years of harassment as one of the top figures in the various truth movements.
Certainly.
Now he started off as an LA detective who found out about CIA drug smuggling, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. I met him right after 9/11 because he was the only person I saw online talking about it not being real information from day one, and so I flew over to meet him. He told me then about his background. It was to do with a girlfriend he had, and he noticed she was disappearing in the middle of the night, and then via all the things he found out about what she was involved in, he realised they were trying to recruit him because he was a narcotics detective, and they wanted him to cover up for their shipments of drugs. There were drugs going one way and guns going the other.
This was the huge scandal, Sandinist Iran-Contra scandal, and he was right in the middle of it.
Well,
or on the periphery.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, you know, you can't be specific exactly where this particular shipment was going, but yeah, he knew it was a fairly big thing. They tried to recruit him twice, but he refused to get involved in anything like that. He was in his late 20s, about 27, and he had a lot of morality, and he wasn't going to compromise.
Yeah, and he resigned and became a campaigner for the truth.
Kind of, but they tried to push him out. I'll tell you what actually happened. They kept telling him he was crazy because he said, I'm being followed and shot at ever since he brought the information to them. Which
he probably was.
Exactly. And so because they were trying to put this on him, he went to a psychiatrist and got them to sign him off with a clean bill of mental health. And when he presented that to them, they said, but now you have a psychiatric record, don't you? Oh,
lovely. Talk about catch-22. Mm. And then later, he was actually instrumental in the Senate refusing to confirm the CIA director, wasn't it? He actually gave testimony to the US Senate, I think, didn't he?
I think he wanted to. I think they didn't want to call anybody that would... What happened was they promised investigations into it. And when he first set up From the Wilderness, his online investigative journalist magazine, he published right from the beginning that they promised these hearings on the Iran-Contra drug running, etc. And he said, I can guarantee they'll never go ahead with this. They don't want you to know, so it's not going to happen. But yes, they promised. But he confronted Director Deutsch live on TV.
On live TV, yeah.
Yeah, and the great thing about it was in South Central LA, so it was in Compton, and so the people there were all in the room. All the normal people that would have been dragged in and picked up for drugs were surrounding him, so he knew that to go in there live was his opportunity. He knew this was on C-SPAN, he knew it would go global, he knew there was no escape for them, and so he showed up with
the local people to confront Deutsch. And
well, the local people were there, incidental. Right. He saw that as his opportunity to let the world know.
And the upshot was that Deutsch was not confirmed as CIA director.
Yeah.
So he must have had quite a few enemies, he got a lot of harassment. Yep. And now fast forward to 9/11. Mm-hmm. Mike Rupert was one of the first people to go on record with doubts about the official story pretty much straight away.
Straight away. He noticed, because he'd lived near air bases, his father had been in the Air Force, he knew, he'd lived near Andrews Air Force Base, he knew that those planes should have taken off to intercept. So immediately he knew something was up. But as a detective, he watched it like a criminal act. He watched it as a crime scene, whoever was responsible. And so from that moment, he was collecting evidence as if he was going to present it to a jury. And he was meticulous with facts. And so, first of all, he noticed that, and he found out that there were air exercises being run, 5 air exercises. To begin with, I think he only heard about 2, and then he found out about 5. Somebody actually downloaded the website. That it had actually said it on the website the day before, but then they removed it from the website, but somebody had downloaded it.
Right, oh good, oh, yeah, great.
So that was right away, and then within a week he had put together a timeline of all the 4 warnings they'd had, because various newspapers actually published it. The Times published it, the LA Times published it, Fox News went on record 16th of September, and 17th of September on Fox News. They reported that they'd had warnings from at least 7 countries, from the top of 7 countries, that there was attacks.
There was going to be something big happening.
And by the different pieces of information, you could have put together pretty much what was going to take place.
And he put this all in the book, Beyond the Rubicon.
Crossing the
Rubicon. And that's a massive source material, and to this day is one of the most important source books on the 9/11 attacks.
Certainly, yeah.
And he was also, but he did get into a bit of controversy, didn't he, with other 9/11 truthers, because he was never very interested in the physical issues like the collapse of the towers.
Well, I don't think he wasn't interested. He you know, as everybody else was. What he was bothered about was that when people started to do research and then twist the facts to fit their theories, he realised it was beginning to discredit the serious research that a lot of people were doing, and he knew then that, you know, it wasn't going to help any more than it did the previous people who had blown whistle on things. When their information is taken and distorted, then we all get tarred with that same brush. And he just knew, apart from anything else, that they were up to further things, and he needed to move beyond it. He'd done his bit. He felt like now, you know, if we keep staring at one thing, they're going to carry on, and they're going to be so many steps ahead of us.
I remember he emailed me and said, you know, don't let them distract you with their right hand, watch the left hand. Yeah. And I didn't really understand what he meant at the time. I'm not sure if I still do, but I get the idea.
But it is it's that they'll have you running around chasing your tail, trying to find out the minutiae, when you know you've seen the big outstanding flaws in the official story, and then they have you chasing your tail to going down that rabbit hole while they're moving on to the next stage. And you've got to kind of be ahead of them. If you really want to intervene, you have to catch them.
Right.
You know, because otherwise, you can't hold them to account. They're not going to be held to account.
No, it's just about consciousness, really, public consciousness, and creating structures which cross the people's voices.
That's what he's saying, watch where they're going.
Yeah, well, goodness knows where they've certainly come quite a long way since 9/11. Some people would say that they got away with 9/11 and that's what gave them the confidence for the banking heist. Maybe they wouldn't have got away with that. Anyway, that's another.
Well, they've been getting away with this kind of thing. I was trying to think as far back as I could, since anybody at that level was held to account, and I can't think of anybody after Richard Nixon.
No, Nixon
but I
was
could
the
be
last
wrong.
person.
Somebody might say, "Oh no, you're wrong," but that's the
There's
one.
been a few things that have been rumbled. I mean, Oklahoma was rumbled,
but really held to account.
Yeah,
really, where
nobody,
people have been, you know, resign. They don't resign these days. They just carry on.
No. Well, there's a sort of flagrancy that we're seeing today with this sort of Ukraine and the lies about Syria, the lies about Ukraine, just flagrant, even though half the world knows they're lying. Doesn't seem to stop them.
Wars. They're proxy wars because they want to get the pipelines underneath.
But anyway, to get back to 9/11, the other bit of work that Mike did was on the inside trades, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is another huge paper trail issue, very complex, difficult to get into, but you have been doing some research into this.
Yeah.
And we'll continue this in the next show, and people will be able to hear about the inside trades side of 9/11, which is, for many people, just as much of a smoking gun as the collapse of the towers. Thanks very much for now, and we'll catch up with you a little bit later.
Thank you.
Well, that brings to an end this episode of Take Two. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the People's Voice for screening us. Thank you to Coffee Plant for sponsoring us. And if you wish to see any of our previous shows, just go to our YouTube channel, RADTV UK. See you next time.